On the surface, it was just another elegant birthday dinner, polished silverware, designer wine, and rehearsed toasts. But when Ethan raised his glass and joked that the best gift would be if his mother finally left his life for good, Caroline Morgan realized the truth. She had been funding a life that no longer had space for her. No anger, no tears, just one quiet goodbye. What followed wasn't revenge, it was clarity. And the silent unraveling of everything Ethan thought he owned. Because sometimes, the softest exits leave the deepest echoes. I'm Caroline Morgan, 72 years old. And today, I want to share how a birthday dinner, a trust fund, and one cruel sentence from my own son changed everything I thought I knew about love, family, and myself. Have you ever had to let go quietly, no shouting, no goodbye, just to finally hear your own voice again? If stories about self-respect, letting go, and rebuilding from silence speak to you, tell me where you're watching from. Tap like, and subscribe. There are still so many stories of quiet strength waiting to be heard. The dining room gleamed like a photoshoot set, high ceilings, polished marble floors, and a long glass table that stretched farther than necessary. Every place setting was precise. The silver flatware still bearing faint stickers from the upscale department store it came from. As if appearance mattered more than authenticity. Caroline Morgan arrived that morning, suitcase in hand, a bottle of Bram's 1978 Burgundy wrapped in linen and placed gently in her carry-on. She hadn't planned to attend. The invitation had come last minute, via a text from her daughter-in-law Mallory. You're still coming, right? Ethan will expect you there. It wasn't a request. It was a reminder. One of those messages that left no room for refusal, but all the room in the world to feel unwelcome. Still, Caroline came. She always did. She had dressed carefully that evening, in muted tones, letting the pearls Bram once gave her do most of the talking. At 71, she didn't need to announce herself. Her presence, when allowed to exist, carried its own quiet dignity. Mallory opened the door with the bright smile of someone who knew the camera was watching. Her crimson dress hugged her frame perfectly, diamonds glittering under the chandelier lights. She kissed Caroline on the cheek without touching skin. You made it, she said, before gliding back to the kitchen. The party was as elegant as it was cold. Waitstaff floated through the space in black and white uniforms. Guests talked with polished laughter, clinking glasses and adjusting cufflinks. Caroline found her seat near the far end of the table, close enough to hear, far enough to forget. She placed the burgundy bottle on the table, next to a small handwritten note tucked under the linen. Bram had once said they'd open it when Ethan reached a milestone. This was supposed to be that moment. Mallory stood first. Her toast was flawless. As expected, she spoke of Ethan's recent business acquisition, his leadership, his drive. Every sentence wrapped him in gold leaf. Then, with a flick of her manicured wrist, she gestured to Ethan. Say a few words. Birthday boy. Ethan Morgan stood, tall and charming, champagne in hand, his navy suit crisp, his smile perfectly rehearsed. Not the burgundy I brought, he said with a chuckle, nodding toward the generic sparkling wine in his glass. He let his eyes travel slowly across the table, finally resting on Caroline. Well, I'm grateful to have you all here tonight. Truly. And honestly, he raised his glass higher, the best gift this year would be if my mother stopped hovering. A pause. His eyes lingered on her. Or better yet, left my life altogether. Laughter. Stifled gasps masked as chuckles. Even Mallory raised her flute in mock applause. Lips stretched into a performance of surprise. Caroline didn't blink. She placed her fork, still untouched, gently beside the filet mignon. Folded her napkin slowly. Her heart didn't pound. Her hands didn't shake. She simply stood up, slid her chair back with the faintest scrape, smoothed her skirt, and said quietly, "Thank you for dinner." Then she turned and walked toward the door. No one stopped her. No one called her name. The cold air outside felt honest. She walked slowly, without haste, without shame, back at the guest room. She didn't bother folding her clothes. She zipped the suitcase shut. Boots still dusty from the walk. The burgundy sat untouched on the vanity, like a gift left unopened at the wrong party. She didn't take it. The only sound in the house was the rhythmic thump of the suitcase wheels as she bumped them down the stairs. One by one. Outside, the moon had risen behind a curtain of clouds. The coastal wind stung her cheeks. But Caroline welcomed it. She'd once thought grief came with loud cries and slammed doors. But that night, it arrived in silence, in the space between a cruel joke and a polite goodbye. When she reached the front gate, she looked back once, not at the house, but at the glow of the windows and the silhouettes inside, all too eager to pretend nothing had just happened. Caroline turned away. She didn't cry. She didn't explain. She simply left. Caroline Morgan didn't see herself as generous. She saw herself as responsible. The kind of mother who quietly stepped in before things crumbled, who offered help before anyone had to ask. She never kept score, at least. Not until recently. The first time Ethan called her after Bram passed. His voice was tight with urgency. "It's just an idea right now, Mom, but it's got legs. A logistics app. Restaurants could schedule and restock inventory automatically. All I need is some seed money for development." Caroline didn't understand the technology. What she understood was the fire in her son's voice. It was the first time he'd sounded alive since Bram's funeral. So she said yes. No contracts. No repayment plans. Just belief. 2 years later, when that app failed to launch, she helped him cover the lease on the office space he'd prematurely rented. Paid off a silent partner who threatened legal action. Registered the domain for his next venture. The help never came with conditions. Caroline knew what pride looked like in a son's eyes. And she wasn't about to dim it with paperwork. She just wanted him to feel safe enough to try again. When Ethan got engaged to Mallory, he mentioned they'd found a condo in the city, perfect location. A little out of budget. Caroline offered to help with the down payment. Quietly, she paid the entire thing. Let them believe it was partial support. She remembered the way Ethan hugged her after signing the papers. "Thanks for giving us a head start, Mom." He never asked if she wanted her name on the deed. She never insisted. Then came the wedding. Caroline gifted them a small fund set aside for their honeymoon. Another for emergencies. Mallory sent a thank you card, typed. Unsigned. Later, when Mallory opened her boutique, Mallory James Atelier, she visited Caroline 2 weeks in. Flustered and vague. Unexpected fees. Just temporary cash flow issues. "I'll pay you back as soon as the shop stabilizes." Caroline wrote the check without asking for details. She always did. They never said, "We need you." They said things like, "It'd just be easier if. We're hoping you might step in. It's only this once." But it was never just once. The phone calls got shorter over the years. Ethan stopped asking about her garden. Stopped sending photos from their trips unless there was a receipt attached. Mallory's voice on the line was always clipped. Polite but cold, like Caroline's presence in their lives was something they endured rather than embraced. Caroline didn't resent the money. She whispered that aloud to herself sometimes. Just to be sure. What hurt was the unspoken expectation that she would always say yes. That her sacrifices were not favors, but obligations. Late one night, after the birthday dinner that turned into a public dismissal, she sat at the small desk Bram used to write letters on and pulled out the old maroon ledger he'd kept. It had started as a way to track household budgets, grocery lists, insurance payments. After Bram's passing, she turned to it for clarity, writing down every personal transfer made. Every expense covered. She turned to the most recent page. 27 entries over 8 years. Each one marked with a careful, quiet note. Loan for office space, Ethan. Domain purchase, no repayment plan. Boutique support, Mallory, verbal. Emergency condo tax, covered in full. Not one had been repaid. Not one had even been acknowledged. Caroline picked up a pen and drew a clean, dark line beneath the last entry. Her hand didn't shake. It wasn't bitterness. It was boundary. This was where the giving stopped. She sat still for a long time, tracing her finger along the edge of the ledger. Bram had once joked, "You'd make a terrifying accountant." She'd laughed then, but now, she wished she had been just a bit more terrifying. The ledger wasn't about money anymore. It was memory. It was evidence of invisible love, poured out in checks and wire transfers, wrapped in silence. And silence, she realized, had become the problem. They had mistaken her generosity for weakness, her patience for passivity, her unconditional love for unlimited access. But that ledger, those pages, proved something else. She hadn't just given money. She had built their life. Brick by brick. And they had never once turned around to say thank you. The next morning, Caroline Morgan's house was unusually quiet. She sat at the old oak dining table, the same one that had once hosted card games and family dinners. Gentle sunlight spilled across the maroon ledger and a pale yellow folder neatly placed in front of her. There were no tears, no regret, just clarity. Her son Ethan's final words at his birthday dinner echoed in her mind like a blade drawn cold and slow. Or better yet, leave my life altogether. Caroline nodded to herself, as if she'd finally been handed the clearest set of instructions after years of confusion. If her son wanted her gone, she would do exactly that. In full, she picked up her phone and dialed Peter Lang, the young attorney Bram had once hired to manage their personal assets. Peter was sharp, discreet, and most importantly, never asked unnecessary questions. "I'd like to amend the trust," Caroline said calmly, "and I'd like to transfer the title of my home, immediately." There was a brief pause on the other end before Peter replied. "I'll prepare everything." Caroline packed the original trust documents, Bram's maroon ledger, and a sealed envelope marked in her cursive, "To be opened only upon my death." At Peter's office, she signed the paperwork with practiced precision. She had filled out most of the forms in advance, an old habit from decades of managing things for everyone but herself. When Peter reached a critical section, he hesitated. "You're removing Ethan as the beneficiary of the trust?" She nodded. "And transferring it to someone else?" "No, no one, for now." The process was done in under an hour. When she stepped out of the office, everything was in motion. Her house was now owned by a holding company called Locken Property Holdings. Indirectly controlled by her, Ethan was removed as beneficiary and stripped of all financial authority. 2 bank accounts were frozen, including the one Mallory used for her boutique's expenses. All remaining assets were moved to a new private trust under Caroline's full control. No warning, no explanation. That night, she sent Ethan a single, short message. "You told me to disappear. I'm honoring your wish." No forwarding address, no blame, just truth. The next morning, Mallory stood at the counter of her upscale boutique when her business card was declined 3 times. She laughed it off, tried again, still declined. She pulled up the banking app. Access denied. By the time she got home, her face was flushed with rage. She tossed the card onto the marble counter like it had betrayed her. "You need to call the bank," she snapped at Ethan. Ethan, half listening at his laptop, shrugged. But when he logged into their mortgage account and saw the failed payment, and then found himself locked out of their joint bank account, his face went pale. He called the credit union. There were long hold times, and even longer lists of questions he couldn't answer. That afternoon, a letter arrived, no return address, tucked between a real estate flyer and an overdue WA notice. His name was handwritten across the front. Ethan, in the same looping script that used to sign his school permission slips. Inside was a single sheet of cream paper. "You told me to disappear. I've done exactly that." Mallory rolled her eyes. "She's being dramatic. She'll be back, or she'll call begging for forgiveness. Just wait." But Ethan didn't believe that. Because he knew what Mallory didn't, that everything they had, every foundation his career stood on, had been quietly spun from threads Caroline had woven over the years. Gently, invisibly, never asking for credit. And now, every one of those threads had been cut. Ethan opened his business dashboard. Where there had once been green numbers, there were now blinking red warnings. The expansion loan he'd secured the month before, using family assets as collateral, was now a hollow promise. He reached for his phone to call his mother. But there was no number to call. Somewhere up the coast, in a quiet condo in Lincoln City, Caroline sat with a new page open in Bram's old ledger. Morning light spilled through the window. The only sound was the ocean beyond. No bitterness, no vengeance, only peace. Someone once told her, sometimes silence isn't surrender. Sometimes it's the final answer. Ethan Morgan was no longer the tech wunderkind. Within a single week of receiving his mother's quiet, final message, his world began to crumble like a snowball gathering speed downhill, faster, heavier, unstoppable. His company, ShiftSphere, a logistics and operations tech startup, had once been hailed by business outlets as the next unicorn. The media loved him, a self-made founder. Young, sharp, passionate, and bold. But it was all just image. And now, that image was tearing apart at the seams. After his mother, Caroline Morgan, revoked all financial control, Ethan and his wife Mallory were thrust into chaos. Credit cards were declined. Bank accounts, both personal and business, frozen. The expansion loan he'd just secured, backed quietly by assets still legally owned by his mother, collapsed. The bank flagged his portfolio for urgent review. And then, amid the panic, an email landed in the inboxes of ShiftSphere's key investors, from a seasoned investigative journalist. "We are preparing to publish a report on ShiftSphere's funding origins. It involves a previously undisclosed trust, established and financed over several years by Caroline Morgan, mother of the founder." Ethan dropped his phone. He knew exactly what was coming. A few days later, Business Sentinel published the headline, "Tech prodigy Ethan Morgan, quiet ties to family funds emerge." It wasn't a hit piece. There was no mention of fraud. No accusatory tone. Just precision. The reporter had cross-checked the trust documents, aligned financial transfers with key moments in the company's history, and even quoted one early investor. "We were told the seed capital came from an angel investor, not his mother's retirement fund." The fallout was immediate. By Wednesday, ShiftSphere's website went into emergency maintenance. By Thursday, 3 major investors issued public statements. "We are no longer affiliated with ShiftSphere in any capacity." By Friday, Mallory packed a single suitcase and left a single note on the kitchen counter. "I married a man who needed a mother, not a wife." The irony stung. That weekend, Ethan drove to his childhood home, his mother's house. The oak dining table, the garden she used to tend, the warmth of a home that always smelled faintly of cinnamon and black tea. But when he arrived, the house was empty. A discreet, "sold" sign stuck in the yard. The deed now belonged to Locken Enterprises, a name he didn't recognize. Yet something about it felt unsettlingly familiar. He knocked twice, peered through the windows, sat on the porch steps like a child who lost something he couldn't name. A neighbor stepped outside, tentative. "I used to borrow sugar from her sometimes," she said. She moved out quietly, didn't leave much behind. "You're her son, right?" Ethan only nodded. His throat felt like concrete. He had lost everything, but the most painful part wasn't the assets, the house, or the reputation. It was the truth that his mother had left without offering him even the chance to apologize. That afternoon, he returned to Ashland and sat in a small corner cafe. Away from the headlines, away from questions. On the table in front of him sat an almond tart, her favorite to bake. Light, not too sweet, the crust always just dense enough. He had never cared for it. But now, even the smell made his chest ache. His phone buzzed. A missed call from the bank. A message from Mallory, just a question mark. He turned the phone face down. There was nothing left to say. Ethan Morgan was no longer a CEO. No longer the golden boy. No longer anything but a man sitting in front of a pastry he didn't dare touch. Somewhere far from him, Caroline Morgan walked the shoreline of Lincoln City. The wind swept her silver hair back as she bent down and picked up a pale pink shell. Smooth and unbroken, she held it to her ear, not to hear the ocean, but to remember that silence can be both an echo and an answer. Caroline Morgan did not retaliate with rage. There were no lawsuits, no shouting matches, no social media statements. She simply disappeared, completely. But with deliberate, legal finality. She left behind no forwarding address, no phone number, no traceable bank accounts, not even a name on a headstone. After her final quiet meeting with attorney Peter Lang, Caroline completed the last stage of a plan she'd been silently crafting for years. Every remaining asset, her Portland home, decades of savings, and a modest portfolio Bram had left her, was transferred into a nonprofit scholarship trust. She named it the Bramwell Elias Morgan Memorial Scholarship. No mention of Caroline, not Corvina, not Morgan, just Bram. He always believed in education. She wrote in a note to the trust manager. and in protecting the elderly from the selfishness of those closest to them. She added a clause. The scholarship would only be awarded to students studying finance or law, with preference given to those focused on elder guardianship and ethical estate planning. It only needs to support one student per year, she said, but it must last forever. The trust was listed under anonymous donation. No founder name, no press release. She wasn't looking for gratitude. She wanted a subtle shift in the current, quiet, steady, just like the life she had lived. Exactly 1 year later, Ethan Morgan stood in front of a weathered headstone tucked in a small private cemetery outside of Portland. It read, "Locken, beloved by none, known by few. She lived 72 years and left it all to education. No flowers, no photograph, no sign anyone had visited. Just a shell name, Locken, once used by his mother to register holding companies and manage silent assets." Ethan sat on a stone bench nearby, hands folded, staring at the empty space where he had hoped, childishly, foolishly, to find a trace of her. A note, a quote, anything. But she had left nothing, exactly as she promised in her last message. "You told me to disappear. I honored your wish." That same afternoon, in a small seaside town called Lincoln City, Caroline walked the wind-swept trail that curled along the dunes, her scarf fluttering in the breeze. In her coat pocket was the final confirmation letter. The scholarship fund was now active. The paperwork filed, the assets secured, her identity scrubbed from every public record. She stopped by a small art gallery near the wharf. In the window hung a charcoal sketch. A lone woman standing at the edge of a cliff, coat billowing in the sea wind. Her face turned away, but her stance, firm, unshaken, spoke volumes. Caroline stood in front of the glass for a long while. Bram would have liked this, she thought. He always said good art tells the truth without needing to shout. That night, in her rented condo under the alias Cora Wynne, Caroline lit a single candle and opened her final notebook. She wrote, "No revenge, no drama, no audience. I simply reclaimed what was mine, then cut the cord." Silent, but complete. There was nothing left for Ethan to cling to. No estate, no will, no grave. He once believed she was weak, that he had control, that his story was built by his own hand. But in truth, it was always her holding the frame together. And by the time he realized it, she was gone. A full year had passed since Caroline Morgan walked out of her son's life, not with rage, not with tears, but with utter, deliberate silence. Ethan Morgan still remembered that birthday dinner like a scar. His cutting remark, her calm, wordless departure, the sound of her chair sliding back. No fight, no drama, just gone. He had convinced himself it was temporary, that she'd come back, maybe with a letter, a scolding, some explanation. But nothing came, just emptiness. And with time, that silence grew heavier. 1 year later, on the same date, Ethan drove to a private cemetery just outside of Portland. He'd heard rumors, a foundation, a donation, a final act of departure. He found the headstone easily. It was simple and cold. Locken, beloved by none, known by few. She lived 72 years and left it all to education. No flowers, no photo, no mention of mother, no real name. Just Locken, a name she'd once used to register shell companies and conceal holdings. He stared at the stone, hoping for something. A hint, a trace, anything that might feel like her. But there was only wind, rustling through the trees. Later that afternoon, Ethan stopped by a quiet cafe in downtown Ashland, one his mother used to visit. There, in a small porcelain dish, sat an untouched almond tart. Her favorite. He couldn't eat it. The scent of almond and lemon made his chest ache. He remembered how annoyed he used to be when she insisted on baking from scratch. Now, he'd give anything to sit across from her again, just once more, and hear her hum while whisking batter. But she wasn't coming back. Not because she had passed, but because she had chosen a life without him in it. In his coat pocket was a folded letter. He had written it months ago. "I'm sorry. If I could go back, I'd choose differently. I know it's too late." He didn't know where to leave it. There was no grave for her. No address. No place that still felt like hers. Eventually, He tore the letter into small pieces and let the breeze carry them out through the cafe's open window. Meanwhile, in a small seaside condo in Lincoln City, Caroline sat near the window, sipping tea as waves lapped against the shore. She wore Bram's old scarf, soft with time. On the table beside her lay a folder, confirmation that the first scholarship recipient had been selected, a young Latina law student from a community college in Oregon. Caroline smiled. No one knew she was behind it. No credit, no praise. And that was exactly how she wanted it. She didn't miss the house. Not the fine china. Not the framed wedding photos or the cold, formal dinners. Not even the quilt Bram's mother had sewn. The only thing she brought with her was a worn photograph of her and Bram on Cannon Beach. Taken years before Ethan was born. The wind had been strong that day, too, but Bram's hand had always been warm in hers. She whispered into the quiet. You see, Bram, I kept my promise. I didn't let our son turn me into a shadow. On the path near the dunes, Caroline bent down and picked up a pale pink seashell, whole and unbroken. She held it to her ear, not to hear the ocean, but to remind herself that sometimes silence is both echo and answer. She was still alive, and for the first time in years, she was finally living for herself. There are moments in life when silence is not strength, but surrender. Quiet goodbye reminds us that sometimes walking away isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Caroline's story is not one of revenge, but of reclaiming self-worth after years of being taken for granted. It speaks to many who've quietly endured toxic patterns in the name of love, duty, or peace. But as the saying goes, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. There comes a time when silence becomes complicity, and generosity, without boundaries, turns into a burden. This story gently urges us to reflect on the relationships we keep, the roles we play, and whether our kindness is respected or simply expected. It reminds us that self-respect isn't selfish, and that choosing peace over pain is a choice we all deserve to make, no matter our age. If this story touched you, we invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to walk away to find yourself again? Or known someone who did? Tap the like button to support our work, and subscribe for more gripping, reflective stories like this one. Wishing you a soft landing after every storm, and the courage to write your own quiet ending. If that's what your peace requires.